Welcome to the Plato Paradigm, a paradigm shift in reading Plato's dialogues. Episode 183, IO 536e to 537b. Socrates has just given 4 analogies to support his claim that IO lacks techne and episteme when he gives the best performances of Homer's best poems. The main reason given for the lack of techne or intelligence at all is the idea that the rhapsode, just like the poet and the audience, is filled with divine power of one sort or another. And interestingly, after all that effort, Io simply says that although Socrates has spoken well, he hasn't been convincing, and Io does not accept that he lacks techne when he is performing. Socrates picks up on the notion of speaking well and now asks Io on which topic Io speaks well, and this speaking well is no longer about the delivery of Homer's poetry, but about the accuracy of the content being delivered. Does Io know what he's talking about? And in a way, this also reflects on Homer, the poet. Does Homer know what he's talking about? One obvious difference between the 4 analogies and the current line of questioning is the very fact that now Socrates is asking questions, while with the analogies he was simply being rhetorical. He was apparently trying to persuade, or at least he was going through the motions of trying to persuade, and Io picked up on that by saying that he wasn't persuaded. So Socrates has moved from rhetoric to dialectic, at least in form. It's not quite clear whether he's being rhetorical all along, or dialectical all along, or really rhetorical and now dialectical. Socrates asks Io which subject he speaks well about, and he adds as a sort of afterthought, because you surely don't know all of the subjects, and it's to this that Io now reacts. You isti, O Socrates, perioudenos hotu. Know well, Socrates, about nothing about which not. We will have to expand this. There is no subject about which I do not know how to speak well. Socrates reacts, depu kai perituton hon sumentun chanes uk eidos, Homeros delege. Surely not about those things which you happen not to know, but Homer speaks about. And Io reacts, kai tauta poia estin ha Homeros men lege egode uk oida. And these, what sort of subjects which Homer speaks about, but I don't know? In other words, Io is claiming that any of the subjects Homer speaks about, he knows. And he should, as a rhapsode, surely, because he has spent years learning all of the lines of Homer, and it goes without saying, surely, that he would know what he's talking about, especially if he actually does interpret Homer. U kai peri technon mentoi lege polachu Homeros kai pola, hoion kai peri heniocheias, ean mnesto ta epe egosoi fraso, alego ero, egogar memne mai. But doesn't Homer speak about techne, arts, crafts, skills, in many places, And doesn't he say many things about these techne? Such as even about chariot racing. If I remember the words, I'll say them to you. Well, I shall say, for I remember. When Io had claimed that he knew everything, all the subjects spoken about by Homer, Socrates feigned to be amazed or skeptical and said, but Homer speaks about many techne, about many things in the techne, in many places that would appear to be impossible for a mere human to remember. But even on the subject of chariot racing, which is surely not something Io has experienced personally, he is still able to declaim all of the words Homer has spoken about chariot racing. And this is exactly what Socrates thought he would do by saying, if I remember, I'll tell you. He knew that that was the way to get Io to recite. And he does this just a few lines after saying that he would listen to Io on another occasion. Socrates doesn't make it easy for Io. He chooses a particular passage. Epede moi halege Nestor antilocho to huie, parainon iulabethenai periten campen ente hippodromia te epi patroclo. Tell me then what Nestor says to Antilochus, his son, advising him to take care with regard to the turning in the horse race for Patroclus. At the end of the Iliad, in what might seem to us to be a bit of an anticlimax, there are funeral games held in honor of Patroclus, who was killed by Hector quite early on in the Iliad. And then Hector was killed by Achilles. The funeral games are not really an anticlimax. They have to be here to end the story arc of the anger of Achilles, which had caused the death of Patroclus. And after that, Achilles has been trying to regain favor with people and with gods. The funeral games are a very honorable way to respect the fallen, and all the participants take the games very seriously, because if they didn't, they wouldn't be respectful. Before the horse race, we have Nestor advising his son Antilochus. Nestor is the oldest person in the Iliad. He's 3 generations old, and because he's old, he's supposed to be very wise, at least very experienced. But he often appears in the Iliad as a talkative old man who just keeps rambling on without saying much to the point. We should ask ourselves really whether a hero like Antilochus really needs advice from his father on how to turn a corner while driving a chariot. I suppose we could speculate on the provenance of this advice. It could have been in wisdom literature. The Homeric tradition includes praising heroes, but also passing on useful information, the sort of information we find in Hesiod about agriculture. This also comes from the same tradition, the oral tradition, and it's simply that the Iliad is an ensemble of various bits of poetry which have all come together gradually over time, and this has found its way into the ending of the Iliad. Well, it's near the end. It's in the 23rd book out of 24. Something, of course, which the oral poets didn't know because they weren't using books. The very fact that Socrates asks for this specific example of chariot racing shows that he is not entirely unaware of the content of Homeric poetry. Homeric poetry is often recited in Platonic dialogues for one reason or another, and we've heard quite a bit in Hippias Minor. All Homeric poetry follows the same pattern. Each line is a hexameter. In other words, it has 6 metra, 6 feet, and each foot can be either a spondi, 2 long syllables, da, da, or a dactyl, a long syllable followed by 2 short syllables, da, didi. Without meter, it would have been very difficult to remember thousands of lines. Plato himself could be copying from a text, but we have to imagine that Io himself knows Homer by heart, and he easily finds the place Socrates is talking about, and he delivers 6 lines. Klinthe naide fesi, he says. Io breaks the line here. Kai autos eux esto eni diffro, he keperisтерetoin, atarton dexion hippon, kensaiomoklesas, hexaite hohenia cherstin, ennus se deto hippos aristeros enchrimtheto, hos antoi pleimnegedo assetai akron hikestai, kyklu poie toio, lithudale astai epauren. You yourself, he says, lean on the well-polished chariot board just to the left of the 2, in other words, the 2 horses. But goad the right-hand horse by calling him at the same time, and yield to him the reins with your hands. Then let the left-hand horse scrape on the turning post, so that the hub of the made wheel seems to reach the extremity, but avoid grazing the stone. So the advice is to make a very tight turn where the chariot wheel almost touches the turning post, and Nestor also explains how his son should turn the chariot, not only to turn tightly, but how to turn at all. And this is by reining in the left-hand horse and releasing the right-hand horse, and encouraging the right-hand horse to gallop, basically, while the left-hand horse is restrained. So we learn incidentally that the race is going anti-clockwise. So the question really is this true? Can Io vouch for this advice?